It is 8:17. My name is Jeremiah, and we're going to talk about A-levels. So, for those of you that don't know, I got my A-level results last week. I did really well, I got 2 A's and a C. I'm going to the University of York to study English, and this video is going to be about how to get an A-star in A-level English. You might be thinking, oh, why didn't you get an A-star? Well, I got an A-star in the coursework, I got an A-star in one exam, and I got a D in the other. So I'm getting it remarked. It balanced out to an A overall. I'm getting it remarked because, of course, I think that's just ridiculous. So yeah, we're going to see how that goes. But I wanted to make a video about how to do well in A-level English because I feel like it's a little different to the other subjects you have. A lot of subjects are memory-based. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but it's very formulaic. You either know the right answer or you know the wrong answer, but English is very subjective. You can write anything and you could, in theory, get marks for it, which is why it's important to know what you're writing and how you're writing it. I would say, and I've got a list off screen, so I might just glance to So let's get started. The first thing, cover all of your books. Read them all as soon as you can. That doesn't mean you have to read them all in the first week. It doesn't mean you even need to, keep yourself up at night or whatever. But you need, in the first few months, all of your books should be read. Trust me, it's much easier doing it now than doing it in year 13 when you have 3 months left. You don't want to be doing it then. You'll probably have a job. I had a job through the whole of sixth form. It was awful. You don't want to spend time that you want to be putting elsewhere into doing things that you should have done already. Reading your books isn't that difficult. If you think that reading your books is honestly the most trying thing that you need to do when it comes to your studies, you shouldn't be doing English literature. I'm gonna break it to you straight. If you can't be asked to read the books, you need to change your A-level. And yes, you can get help from Spark Notes, but we're gonna talk a little bit about Spark Notes in a minute. But that doesn't mean you cannot not read the books. You have to read them. You need to go over them. You need to know the story, the character development, and the plot. You need to know these things because once you get them down and once you understand them, it's so much easier to move on to the key themes without getting held up on, oh, who's this person, or oh, what happened there again, and oh, I didn't actually read up to there, and all that kind of thing. You do not want to be the kind of person that walks into class when the teacher says, okay guys, we're going to go over chapter 17 and you're on page 17. You do not want to be that student. Don't get left behind early. Make sure you're reading, even if it's just a page a day, that's fine, but eventually it needs to get read. It needs to get read halfway through year 12, I would say, is the cut-off point for when you should be reading all your books. Maximum end of year 12. If it's Shakespeare and you're having a hard time going through it, that is completely fine. What you can do is go on this website. I think it's No Fear Shakespeare. It has like a modern English translation of all of the different Shakespeare texts. Just read through that. It's fine because you'll understand it much better if you do. And I can tell you for a fact now, once you read the actual English translation that's modern, you'll look at it has it like side by side, which is really cool. So once you read the actual modern translation, you'll glance at the old one, the Shakespearean one, and you'll think, oh yeah, I can see how he's saying that now. I can see what these words actually mean when they get put into context. So trust me, you need to just do anything, even if it's an audiobook, just make sure you're reading them all. Cover all your books, that's the first thing. Second thing, don't be worried. You do have 2 years. I know I've put a lot of emphasis on getting things done early just now, but you have 2 years to finish your studies. So don't get disheartened if you get a D or an E at your first, in your first exams for your winter mocks. Basically everyone does. My first A-level exam, I came out of year 11 with an A-star in English literature and an A-star in English language. I got a D in English, and I was like, wait, what? It was like, I haven't been the kind of person that emphasizes grades or anything, but it was of course like a real blow because I just didn't think I'd do that poorly, quote unquote poorly, because there is nothing wrong with not doing that well in your first, I'd say your first 6, 7, 8 months. Like your first 2 terms, honestly, you're still getting used to everything, you're still developing your skills, you're getting marked at the same level as a person who is sitting their A-level exams that year got marked. That's how harshly you're getting marked. So don't feel bad if you're getting a D, don't feel bad if you're getting an E, because you aren't ready to sit your A-level exams yet. That's why we have sixth form. That's why you do it for 2 years and not do it for the, in the first 2 weeks. You have those 2 years to improve. So don't stress if your A-level results in the first few months aren't as good as you wanted them to be, because they will improve. I'd say, honestly, that the bell curve for, sorry, not bell curve, like the gradient, there you go, that's how you know I didn't do maths A-level. Jesus, I did statistics and psychology. I'd say the gradient for results in GCSE is much, much smoother or flatter, there you go. No, that's not it either. It's much flatter than it is for A-levels, because I feel like with A-levels, you start off here and you end up here, or you can, but I feel like your GCSE grades don't change that much constantly. It could just be me, I don't know. But anyway, don't be disheartened if your grades aren't what you wanted, because there is always time to improve. Of course, if you're in year 11 and your winter mocks aren't that great, that isn't the best, but you still have 6 months to turn it around, and 6 months is more than enough time for English. Trust me, it is. I'm going to go over all the different AOs and essentially what you'll be marked against. So there are 5 different AOs for those of you that don't know. You'll have this hammered into you basically from day one. So AO1, AO2, AO3, AO4 and AO5. They are all important. You might have some marks awarded to one AO more than others, but that doesn't mean you can scrimp time on each of them or on one of them. You need to include all of them in all of your essays. It's not optional. You can't think, okay, I haven't got enough time for AO4, so I'll just include some AO5. No, everything needs to get done. So AO1 is, let me look at the definition, articulate, informed, personal and creative responses to literary texts, associated concepts, using associated concepts and terminology and coherent, accurate written expression. Basically how you write. I'm of the opinion that English literature is split 60-40 between what you write and how you write it. I think there is a huge amount of significance on how you write things and not just what you write. It just changes the flow of your essay, it changes the way that your examiner views you, and it is 28% of your marks. 28% of your marks are purely based on how you write your points. 28% is the difference between an A star and a B, maybe even a C. Yeah, 30. Yeah, it's the difference. It's basically the difference between an A star and a C. You can have the same points, but if you write them awfully, you could get a B, but if you write them really well, you can get an A star. The exact same point, just depends on how you write them. The way to improve your AO1 is by reading more. Firstly, you need to read more because you need to learn from people that are better than you. You can't teach yourself an instrument. You need to see, people online, you need to be watching YouTube videos, you need to be listening to other people and seeing what they do and letting them show you how to play it properly. In the same way, you need to be reading other people's writing, even if it's just best-selling authors. That's good as well. You don't need to be reading like literary criticisms or anything like that. You can just be reading books in general and thinking, okay, what do they do? That's step number 2. What do they do that makes their writing good? Why do I enjoy their writing? Is it the way they vary sentence length? Is it the way that they use their dialogue? Is it the way that they change the structure? Is it the way that they describe things? All that kind of thing. Think, what do they do and why is it good? The third thing is to emulate it, and that's the hardest bit. Emulating is difficult because at first you don't get it. At first, the way that you emulate isn't going to be that great and you're not going to get it right and it's really demotivating. But just like art and just like learning an instrument, you need to be bad before you can be good. You need to be good before you can be better, and you need to get better before you can be the best. You need to make sure that you're at least trying. And even if you don't do as well as you want to now, don't get demotivated. It's better to be bad now, and then when it comes to your A-level exams, you can do it well, than it is to get demotivated, to leave it for 2 years, and then realize, oh wait, I should have done it 2 years ago. That's exactly what I was thinking at some point. Oh, I should have started this a year ago. I should have started it a month ago. That kind of thing. Don't get yourself into that kind of mindset. Start now because you have the time. Year 12 isn't a walk in the park. It's a big step up from GCSE. And year 13 is a big step up from year 12. But you have time. They know that it's a big step up. Your teachers know that. Your examiners know that. They're not trying to trip you up and laugh and push you over. They're trying to help you. But at the same time, you need to help yourself, and you need to put yourself out of your comfort zone. So you need to write more. That's the best way I can say to improve your AO1. Read more, understand why you like what you read, and then do it yourself. Try and do it yourself, and eventually you'll improve. You will, I promise you. AO2 is what you analyse. What you analyse is of course extremely important, but it's 24% of the marks. It's even less marks than how you write it. What you analyse isn't even as important as how you write what you analyse. You can have the most basic points, but if you're writing them better, you'll get more marks at the end of the day. But that doesn't mean to say that you want basic points. You need to know what you're analysing. That's why I'm saying that you should be reading the books as quickly as you can, because once you've read the book and you understand everything in it, all the characters, what happens and all that kind of thing, it's easier to move on to the key themes. And key themes are basically going to be your Bible. You should be making a list, not as you go through, you don't really need to as you go through, but once you've finished it, you need to think, what are the key themes of this book? Why was this book written? That's another important thing. Every book on the spec that we study has something called literary merit. Literary merit isn't just an arbitrary term that they put there because they like it. Literary merit is essentially a book that was written for a reason to criticize, highlight, and explore a significant aspect of society or human nature. That's probably nowhere near the definition, but in layman's terms, that's what it is. That's why you won't see things like Harry Potter or the Mortal Instruments or anything on our specs, because yeah, they're good books, they're good reads, but they're not meant to be in the same category as example To Kill a Mockingbird or A Streetcar Named Desire. The books have two different purposes. All books and plays can be read for entertainment, of course, but some are purely for entertainment and enjoyment, just like Harry Potter is, and some are meant to be highlighting a different part of society and getting people to change. And there is nothing wrong with a book being purely for entertainment, so don't get me wrong, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that Harry Potter isn't as good as To Kill a Mockingbird, but they have two different purposes, and you're going to be looking at the former, latter, which one? The ones with literary merit. You're going to be looking at those. Or every single book on the spec was written for the reason of exploring human nature or exploring society and criticizing it or emphasizing some part of it. For example, The Handmaid's Tale is a story about how women are in a really, really conservative Christian society in America, and the fact that they're objectified. It was written in the 80s, and it's a reflection of how women were treated then, because of course that was when second wave feminism came about, and that's when women were really trying to campaign for even more rights than, well, not even more, but more rights than they had at the time. So that was the purpose of the book. You need to be exploring the purpose. You need to be thinking to yourself, why has the writer written this book specifically? You need to be thinking as well about what the characters achieve to that end. Oh my god, if another train goes past, and this is why it's important to read the book once again. I'm going to stress it because I know some of you are listening to this or watching this, and you're not going to do it. You're not going to read the book no matter what I say. You should read the book. I'm telling you right now, you need to read the book. Some of you just won't. You'll probably regret it. You might not. I don't know. But anyway, reading the book is really important, because once you know the characters, you can think, okay, why has this specific character worked in this specific way? Don't get me wrong, the best books feel like real life, even if it's fantasy. You can immerse yourself. Have you ever been reading a book and you forget the fact that you're even reading, and it just feels like you're watching a movie? Your eyes are just scanning the page and you're in your own world, and it's just like, and then you realize that you've suddenly gone too deep down the rabbit hole and you're in a completely different universe. A good book can do that, but at the same time, a good book like that is written, it's crafted by a person. It doesn't just materialize out of thin air. It's crafted by a person, and it's meant to elicit certain emotions. Each character is a tool. At the end of the day, they're a puppet. For example, some of you might have done An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. Mr. Burling, for example, is an idiot. An Inspector Calls was written in 1946. However, it's set in about 1910. And Mr. Burling obviously has that quote where he says, there's never going to be a world war and the Titanic will never sink. But we know that after the book is set, after the play is set, fine. After the play is set, the Titanic does sink and there is a world war. That is a very, very deliberate choice of words by the writer because he wants to highlight how stupid Mr. Burling is. And Mr. Burling is a caricature for the upper class. And the writer is basically saying that the upper class are stupid because they don't know what they're talking about. That's the purpose of Mr. Burling. Everything that comes out of his mouth is stupid for a reason. It's not just for entertainment purposes, it's for a reason. And you need to be thinking, even if it's not an Inspector Calls or whatever, what is the purpose of this character? Why has the author included them? Because I can assure you, I write a lot myself and I'm trying to write a book, of course, everyone who isn't. But I can assure you there are some characters that have been cut out, there are some characters that have been put in, there are entire pages, chapters, story arcs that just don't see the light of day because they just didn't fit. Everything in there has gone through several editing processes for a reason because it's meant to be in there. And you need to be thinking as a literature student, your job is basically to say why things are in there for a reason and what that reason is. That's basically your job. That's what the A-level is meant to show, your critical thinking skills and your ability to analyse the literature. So you need to be thinking about what you're analysing. Of course, there are overarching things like themes and characters and ideas, but there's also close language analysis. There's your upper class analysis, which is the loftier stuff that kind of pervades the whole book, and there's close language analysis, which goes over specific words, sentences, phrases, that kind of thing, the purpose of the dialogue, all of that. There's the language, I'd say the analysis, even though it's 24%, I would honestly give half the marks to the wider themes analysis and half the marks to the close language analysis. You can't sacrifice one for the other. You need to include both. You need to be including the themes, yes, but you also need to be including analysis of the specific words that make you think of those themes. You need to think back to the specific parts of the book or the specific parts of the play where you thought, wow, desire is a big theme in this play, or wow, greed is a big theme in this play, and you need to be thinking what specific words and what specific sentences made me think that. Those are the kind of sentences and words you need to be analysing. You need to be thinking about the significance of the word, for example, imagery. Why was the imagery, for example, in a book, if there's imagery relating to heaven and hell, why? It's not in there for the sake of it. Why was that specifically there? And what does that imagery make you feel? How does that relate to the theme? You need to be thinking about the specific words, yes, but how those specific words feed into the theme and what purpose the theme has for what the writer is trying to say. Another good way of figuring out what the writer is trying to say is AO3, context. Context is going to be your best friend if you don't understand a book. If you don't understand what the writer is trying to say at all, context and history is your best friend because it will basically tell you. Most books can be summarized by something happened historically, the writer is fed up, and the writer wrote something. That's basically the backstory to 98% of the books you'll read. So, Handmaid's Tale, Atwood is fed up with the objectification of women and misogyny in Western society. She writes The Handmaid's Tale. A Streetcar Named Desire, Williams is angry that the American dream and how it's basically just fake and it's a fake dream that's meant to have loads of allure but doesn't. He writes A Streetcar Named Desire. The Great Gatsby, Fitzgerald just hates rich people, so he writes The Great Gatsby. You need to be thinking about the context. Context, there are 3 different types of context you can go for. When the book is set, when the book is written, and when the book is read. Those are the 3 different contexts you can look at. You can look at all 3, you can look at 1. You should probably try and include as many of them as possible. As I said with an Inspector Calls, when the book is set is very important because sometimes there'll be foreshadowing, kind of. I can't remember the exact term. It's been a few weeks since the holidays and I haven't done a lot of literature. Dramatic irony, there you go. It's dramatic irony. So, there'll sometimes be dramatic irony where something happens in the future that we know that the characters don't. And that's there for a reason. As I said, Arthur Burling says, there's never going to be a world war because Priestley wants to show that Arthur Burling is an idiot. He has no idea what he's talking about. He thinks there won't be, but there is. When the book is written is also important because that's when the issues are going on in society that prompted the author to write the book most of the time. Sometimes a book is set in the past just because it can be, or because that era is cool or whatever. But sometimes most of the time for books of literary merit at least, Something is happening at that point in society, in time, that makes the writer want to write something that reflects it, even if the actual work is set in a different, in a different time, or a different country, or a different universe, or whatever. A Handmaid's Tale, for example, it's set in the future, even the future from now. It was written in the 80s, and that's when, as I said, second wave feminism came about. So, you need to be thinking about when it was written, when it was set, and also now, because we're going to interpret it differently now than you would 50 years ago, or even 10 years ago. Things change a lot, and with the current political climate, you can definitely include a lot of different interpretations and ideas about how to understand a text. And that leads me on to AO5 pretty well. I'm going to go to AO5 and then go to AO4. So, critical views. Critical views are essentially anything that adds a different perspective. Anything that adds a different perspective into the mix. So it could be, for example, if you're looking at animal farm from a capitalist perspective or a Marxist perspective, those are the critical views. That's AO5. AO5 is actually 12%. I didn't mention AO3 is 24%. AO4 is also 12%. So between AO4 and AO5, which are very, very closely linked, you're only getting 24%. But that's still 24%. That is a quarter of the marks you can get. So you can't leave AO4 and AO5 out because you're capping yourself at 76% of the marks. And 76% is a B. And that's assuming you get every single mark in all the other AOs. And let's be honest, that's probably not going to happen. Not because I'm insulting you or because you guys are new or whatever, but very, very few people get full marks in anything. I mean, I got full marks in a few. You can't rely on the fact that, I won't include AO3 or I won't include AO5 because I'll make it up somewhere else. You can't make it up somewhere else because those marks are specifically for that AO. You can't get 15% in AO4 because you didn't include AO5. You will get 12% and you'll just lose the extra marks. You could spend your whole essay on AO4, but you'll still only get 12% of the marks because that's how much they will award you. They will not give you any more. If you're considering, for example, a feminist perspective in The Handmaid's Tale, that's AO5. You could consider a Christian perspective in AO5. In The Handmaid's Tale, that's AO5. These different perspectives from political ideologies, religious views, all that kind of thing, even just normal criticisms. You're arguing usually you can't argue one side of a coin in your essay questions. Some essay questions will be explore the significance of da-da-da, or there'll be statement in quotations and then discuss. Nowhere does it say we're giving you this one specific view, you need to argue that and you need to prove that. It will always be discuss or explore. And those aren't one-directional things. Those aren't, one-directional? Those aren't one-tailed things. They're two-tailed. You can go either way. You can argue to the contrary, or you can argue for. And you should be doing both. You should definitely be doing both. You can't leave one of them in favor of the other because you might lose marks for it. Yes, you can do well. You can do well. You don't need to have everything being a tumultuous debate. You don't need to say, you don't need to have one entire paragraph or one entire page or 2 pages or something arguing to one extent and then say, oh, by the way, that was all kind of useless. It doesn't make sense. I'm going to argue for the other now. That's not what I'm saying. But you need to be able to show that you can assess and explore different interpretations, and that's kind of where your creation comes in. That's where your liberties come in, because you can use the arguments that you've been given in class or that you've looked at in class, but honestly you can kind of put anything here. AO5 is more of a mixed bag than anything else. So long as you're adding different perspectives, you can genuinely do whatever you kind of like, and that doesn't mean, I'm going to include a gamer's perspective or whatever. Please don't do that. God, you will lose marks, don't do that. You can include a feminist perspective in a book that isn't really about feminism. You could, I don't know why you would, but you could. And if you can argue it properly, then you'll get the marks. It's not, as I said, it's not just about what you say, it's about how you say it. So long as everything that you say has significance and actually argues for the question, then you'll be fine. So AO4 is not context, connections and wider reading. So basically, you're going to be given a spec, and the spec is just all of the books that your teachers can pick from that you can analyze in your A-level course. You will not read all of the books on your spec. There will be some books on the spec that you don't read. Wider reading is basically, okay, we've given you this essay question about one book. What have you been reading in your own time that can support or argue against what you're analysing in this book? You need to show that you've been reading your own stuff outside of the spec and that you can bring it in and help argue your point. I remember that I had, in my actual exam, I had unseen extract on insecurity. No, was this my actual? I think so. But anyway, I had an extract on insecurity, and it's basically about a white girl from like rural America moving to the big city so that she can go to university. And it was about exploring the significance of insecurity. So she was insecure, of course, that her parents kind of like dressed like farmers and everyone else had like different clothes on and all that kind of stuff. And she was embarrassed about her parents and all that kind of thing. But for insecurity, I used a book called Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. It's a really good book, especially if you have... I recommend anyone reads it. It's about British colonialism. So it's about a tribe in Africa that's getting colonized by the British, and basically the tribes transition from their traditional culture to a more Western Christian one. And the main character in that is very traditional, and he doesn't want these changes to happen, and he becomes very insecure in himself and very insecure in his tribe, and he loses a lot of faith in them because of the transition. So I wrote about insecurity there. You would not at first glance think that a burly black man, burly black, African guy trying to resist British colonizers is in any way, shape or form related to like some white girl in America, like 100 years later. Yet it is, as long as you're arguing to the actual point, it is, and you can do that. It's not that difficult. So you need to make sure that what you're writing has significance with the point that you're meant to be arguing. Of course, the trick with wider reading isn't just to bring it in for the sake of it. You can't just bring in a random paragraph about some different book and then move on as if nothing happened. You need to make sure that what you're including actually works towards the point. You need to make sure that if you're exploring the significance of insecurity and Things Fall Apart, how is the significance similar or different? That's what I do. The trick for wider reading, in my opinion, is to bring in the same theme from a different book, but argue how or explore how it's similar or how it's different. And if it's similar, why both the authors exploring the same kind of thing? I don't know. If it's different, why is it different? Why do you think these same two different authors use the same emotion or the same theme and use it differently? One author might be trying to criticize society, another one might be trying to criticize human nature, for example. Those are the kind of things you want to be thinking of. That's what will get you those marks. Trying to bring in a different book that's completely unrelated, that isn't on the spec. I want to specify, you cannot read books on the spec just because you haven't studied it in class. If it's still on the spec, it doesn't count as wider reading. So even if it's a really good analysis that you've brought in, it will not count. It won't count at all. So you need to make sure that the books that you're reading in your own time aren't on the spec. It probably won't be. So don't worry about it too much. It probably won't be, but you need to make sure that the books that you're reading aren't on the spec and that you're doing your own thing and that you can bring in the books that you're reading for the sake of supporting the essay question or arguing against the essay question. That doesn't mean you can bring in any book. I would refrain from bringing in, as I said, books that don't have literary merit. For example, Harry Potter. Don't bring in fictional, don't bring in fictional books, but at the same time, I think you can kind of tell when a book is written for entertainment and when a book is written for the sake of, for a wider sake. The difference between The Handmaid's Tale and Harry Potter. And I use Harry Potter as an example because it's a really popular book series and you probably read it if you're doing English literature. And I'm not trying to bash it, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to bash it. It's just that it's not the kind of book you can write about, or book series you can write about in your A-level exams, because it's not meant to be written for that purpose. It's meant to be written for the simple purpose of entertainment, and there is nothing wrong with that, as I said. But you need to make sure that the books that you're writing about and you're bringing in for wider reading has literary significance. And if you're unsure, just ask your teacher. They'll know. they've got the degree, they've done their time in university, they've done their time in sixth form, they know whether it will have literary significance or not. My teacher, honestly, really, shout out Mr. Ritchie, he was really, really helpful when it came to me doing my coursework, because for your coursework you need to pick 2 books and basically compare them. And I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. We started our coursework at like the beginning of year 13, end of year 12, beginning of year 13. I left it until like December. I just didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know which books to choose, and it was like February time, and I still hadn't like done anything. Oh Jesus! He showed me 2 books. He was the one that actually suggested Things Fall Apart to me, and I picked The War of the Worlds. So of course, The War of the Worlds, it's basically the movie. It's set in about 1900, and it's about aliens from Mars invading the UK, and Things Fall Apart is about British colonizers. So I thought, I put 2 and 2 together. He suggested Things Fall Apart, and I went and did my own kind of thing. I read that, and I thought, what kind of book would relate to colonization and individuality and society and all that kind of thing. And I thought, The War of the Worlds, yeah. So I read both of those, and I compared them. And I actually have the question here. Hold on. Let me find what my exam question was. Okay, so you basically have to pick a quote or something, and then you can write about that. So you know how you have those essay questions where it's like, quote, discuss? That's basically what it was. So I did, such then is the human condition, that to wish greatness for one's country is to wish harm to one's neighbours. And that's a quote by Voltaire. And the question I came up with reference to the quotation, compare and contrast the themes of invasion, community, and humanity in Things Fall Apart and The War of the Worlds. So that's what I did, and I got an A* in that. So the books don't even need to be related, so long as they don't need to be related on paper, so long as the themes are. And that's the important thing, looking at the themes and wondering, how can I bring them in? And what can I say about the 2 that will actually support the question? That's the thing. There might be 2 books that are really similar and have themes that really work together, but if you can't bring it in a way that supports the question, you'll get no marks for it whatsoever. So make sure that when you do your wider reading, you're actually looking at books that support the question. Now, as I said before, cover all of your bases. Don't think that you can compromise one AO for another. You need to investigate all of them. You can't just, leave 2 or 3 by the wayside and then go for the ones that you like or go for the ones that you understand more. You need to read the books so that you can understand the critical views of it. You can understand the connections in wider reading, that you can understand the context. The earlier you get this down, the easier it will be to write. Now, this is the second biggest thing. This is like the 4th actually. So the first one was cover all of your books, read them all. The second one was don't be worried about your exams, your exam result grades in the first year. Third one, hit the AOs, make sure you're hitting all of them. The 4th one, I would say, is to learn what to write first and then learn how to write it second. Even though how you write is more important, or is very important, I should say, not more important specifically, but I would say that once you understand what you're writing and once you hit all of the AOs, even if it takes you an hour and a half, to write an essay that hits all of the AOs, then take an hour and a half, do it. In your first year, even in your second year as well, it doesn't matter, just do it. Spend that hour and a half writing as much as you can to hit all the AOs, and then once you're confident that every single essay you do can hit all of the AOs and that you're getting the good marks for it, even if it's 5 pages, even if it takes an hour and a half, that's when you start cutting down. That's when you start writing faster. That's when you start saying things more succinctly. Succinctly? It's the suck that gets me. But anyway, that's when you start actually cutting down on the things that aren't necessary, and that's when you'll start shining. That's when you'll be able to, because if it takes you an hour and a half now, the next time you write it, it'll take you an hour and 25 minutes. Then it'll take you an hour and 20 minutes, then an hour and 15, and so on and so forth. Then you'll be able to write it in 40, just like I could. And, I had a really big issue with waffle in my first year and a half of sixth form, really. I waffled. I could write, I knew how to write, and I could write very flowery and descriptive essays. But the problem with that is that if you're focusing too much on all the frivolities and the description, you're not hitting the AOs. You have a time limit. You do have a time limit. Don't worry about it so much at the beginning, but you do have a time limit. You will have a time limit in the exam. That's what I'm trying to say. You will. So even though it might not matter now, when you sit your actual exams, it will. So you need to make sure that you aren't spending all your time doing all this frivolous, la-di-da kind of writing. Get to the point. Here's another thing. In my opinion, you shouldn't write an introduction. I never did. I've always hated introductions because I never knew what to say. Like, just let me get on to the work. But they don't get you marks. You do not get marks for your introduction, you get marks for your analysis. Even if you write a really good introduction, they can only give you might get a mark or two, but that's it. And that mark or two could be the difference. But why would you risk spending 5 minutes writing an introduction? Why would you risk spending 5 lines writing an introduction when you could spend those 5 lines going over AO3 or going over AO2 or going over AO4, AO5? You can get those marks in a better way, in a more efficient way, somewhere else. So don't spend your time writing introductions. Just go straight into the essay. You will not lose marks for that. They will not mark you down if you don't have an introduction. You might have been told in year 11 that you should write an introduction, all that kind of thing. You can just go into the analysis straight away and you will not lose marks for it. The same with the conclusion. You don't need a conclusion. Of course, it reads better if you do. It flows better if you do, sure. But you can't risk those extra marks you could get just for flow, just for the sake of flow. You won't get marks for flow. You get marks for analysis, and writing your introduction has no analysis. So get straight to the point, get straight into your first paragraph. When it actually comes to writing my paragraphs, well, actually, before I start that, I just want to talk about plans. So you'll have 45, 50 minutes maybe to write an essay, plan it and write it. Honestly, I would say don't spend more than 3 minutes on your plan. Some people like a really long detailed plan, so they'll spend 15 minutes on it and they write the quotes out in full and everything. Don't do that. Do not. You will waste time, you will lose marks. Because again, as I said, you don't get marked for your plan. You don't get marked for your plan, you get marked for the analysis you write down. So you won't be getting marks for all the stuff you leave in your plan in the margin when, you're actually getting marked for the essay. Don't spend those 15 minutes can be 1, 2, maybe 3 paragraphs that you can put into, well, maybe not 3, an extra paragraph that you put in, or an extra page of work that you put in that can get you those extra 3, 4, 5, 6 marks. It can do that. Do not spend time on your plan that you don't need to. You should be breaking your things down into this way. This is how I did it. So I read the question. Some people like to, read it out twice, 3 times, and then highlight it and all that kind of thing. If you do that, you do you. If it works, then fine. But you're going to need to make sure you do it quickly. So what I decided to do is, okay, read the question. What are they basically asking me to do? What theme? Okay, explore the theme or the significance of insecurity. Fine. Okay, where do I see insecurity in this extract? I break it down into 3 things. I always do 3 paragraphs. They'll each be maybe a page long. You can do less, you can do more. I wouldn't suggest doing more. I do max 1 page per paragraph. Don't let your paragraphs get any longer than that. I just pick 3 things and then I go for those 3 because it's better to write a lot about a little than it is to write a little about a lot. If you're picking 3 things and exploring them in depth and going over the context and you're hitting all the AOs for all those 3 points, you will get 25 marks if you do them properly and it's well done. You will. And I've got 25 marks. I can assure you, you will. I didn't do 4 or 5, like some people do like 6 paragraphs and everything. You don't need to do that. You should not be bringing in, I would say don't bring in any more than 4 points, because if you bring in, and I would say like 3, like max 3, maybe 4, unless you have 1/4 that's really good. But it's because you're bringing in so much, you don't have enough time to cover everything in the depth that you need to get the marks. You should be picking 3, going over the AO2, AO3, AO4, AO5. If you're doing that properly, 3 should take 40 minutes. It should. And that's not including, an introduction or conclusion. That's just 3, you should be doing 12, 15 minutes per paragraph. If you're doing any shorter than that, then you probably haven't covered enough. That's another thing. Some people say don't write too much. You can't write too little. I would honestly say that writing too little is the problem. And that's why people lose a lot of marks, because they have a good point, they just don't go in depth enough with it. They don't explore it to the extent that they have to hit those top bands. That's what you need to be doing. You can't just have a good point. You need to make sure it's a great point. You need to make sure it's an amazing point. You need to hammer that point home. And yeah, that doesn't mean you spend 2 pages saying the same thing over and over, like I used to. But at the same time, you need to make sure you're covering it in depth. In depth. You can't do 6 in-depth paragraphs. Half a page isn't an in-depth paragraph. A page is an in-depth paragraph. It should be a page per point. 3 pages. You shouldn't be doing less than 3 pages. 3 pages, maybe maximum 4, maybe 4.5. You should be doing that much. 3 pages is your Bible. 3 pages is your golden rule. You should be doing 3 pages of work at least, and at the minimum you should be doing, at the most you should be doing 4. Any more than that, you're writing too much, and you're not gonna have a good time management. Any less than that, and you're just not writing enough, you will not get the marks for the detail. Plans, I go for 3 points. I think immediately, okay, this theme, okay, so insecurity, for example, in the unseen, it's a little different for unseens because you haven't read them before, but for books, you should be much more confident with this. You should know immediately, once you read the question and you see whichever theme they're asking you to look at, you should know instantly what you're going to go to, where you're going to go to, because you should be thinking, okay, what theme or which parts of the book fit best with this theme. That's what I was thinking when I was looking at that insecurity extract. Okay, so I'm gonna do, okay, insecurity in her mother, insecurity in her father. Those are the 3 things I did, because of course she went with both their parents. So I just picked each of the characters and I just did a paragraph on them. So the second paragraph was about her mum, so it was about how her mum was dressed, because she obviously spent some time describing that. And the third thing was about her dad and how there's insecurity in her father, and that's basically what I did. In those, you need to be bringing in AO1, AO2, AO3, AO4, AO5. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you need a rigid kind of structured, some sort of structured chart or something, so you do the exact same rigid formula each time, because that's not going to get you the marks. It'll mean you include everything, but it won't mean that you necessarily get the marks. What you could do is, obviously you need AO1 and AO2 for all the points you make. But since you've got 3 paragraphs, and since you have 3 extra AO objectives, so AO3, AO4, AO5, you could include one of those in each paragraph. That is fine. So you don't need, now I actually misspoke earlier, you don't need to have AO4 in each paragraph, you don't need to have AO5 in each paragraph, you don't need to have AO3 in each paragraph, but they all need to be in your essay somewhere. You can't leave them out. So you can have one paragraph that focuses on context, as well as a theme, of course, one paragraph that focuses on a theme that has wider reading, and another paragraph that focuses on a theme and then goes on to AO5 interpretations and perspectives. You can do that. That is what I would suggest you do. So you do, each one has an overarching theme, right? 3 themes, then you supplement that, of course, with the analysis and everything. Then you go on to, first one, okay, context. Writer's intentions. Why is the context here? Why is the context significance? What does the context actually have to do with what the writer is trying to say? Second paragraph, theme. Okay, should link in from the context perhaps. You should have analysis to support that. Then you go to wider reading. Where's the book that what book have you read that supplements this? Does it agree? Does it disagree? By the way, your themes can conflict with each other. You don't necessarily need to do themes. You just need to have 3 different topics to talk about. So it could be, one could be, for example, if the question was, the X character is a bad person, discuss. One topic could be, yes, they are. Another, no, they're not. The next, maybe, or it depends. So that's why I don't like heavy planning, because it depends. Sometimes you'll think of something while you're writing your essay that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise in your plan. And that is when, you kind of think, oh, so do I go with what I thought up now, or do I go with what I've done in my plan? No. You need to have a loose, flexible plan, so that if you're thinking up stuff on the fly and you remember stuff, that you can still include it without messing up everything. So just think, main topic, which AO am I going with? Next main topic, which AO am I going with? Next topic, which AO am I going with? overall, you should have each AO, one to a paragraph, perhaps it doesn't necessarily have to be, but you should have AO3 in there somewhere, AO4 in there somewhere, AO5 in there somewhere, and of course your AO1 and AO2 is a given. So that's what you should be doing. You need to make sure that you get this down to a T. You need to make sure that all of the AOs are there and all of them are done well. You need to know the context of your book. That's why it's important to read it. You need to know the wider reading. That's why it's important not only to read that book, but to read other books as well. You need to know the critical views. That's why it's important to read it. You can't know the critical reviews you can't know the critical views in enough detail if you haven't read the book. The book or the poem or whatever, the play, is going to be important to you. You need to read it. Please, I'm begging you. Your year 13 self will beg you. They will have begged you. They will. I can guarantee you, you will regret not reading the books now if you don't start. So make sure you're reading those books as well, okay? So, once you've actually gotten your, once you've made sure that you're including everything, that's when you focus on cutting down. That's when you focus on making your time up. That's when you focus on getting the time management down to a T. Because if you're writing a quality essay, but it takes you an hour, that is so much better than trying to fit everything in 40 minutes first, and then trying to make it quality. Okay? So focus on what you're writing, and then focus on So focus on what you're writing and then focus on how quickly you write it. Please, for the love of God, read your books. You need to. You could go on Spark. That's what I was going to talk about. Spark Notes. So you will not always have, this relates to AO5 mostly, you will not always know what to say. So you can go online. If you want to investigate a very specific part of the book and your teacher hasn't covered it in class or something, you could ask your teacher, or you can just go online and see what other people say. That's why Spark Notes and Lit Charts are all really, really good resources. But they're not the backbone. They can't be the crux of your knowledge. That is not enough to get you through A-level to a good standard. And I didn't do as much work as I should have in English, but the least I can say is, even when it was down to like the last few months, that's when I actually thought, you know what, I actually need to go and read the books. Even if I know everything even if I read the stuff on Spark Notes, that's not enough. I need to read the books because they're going to ask me questions assuming that I know everything in the book. Spark Notes does not give you everything in the book. It gives you a summary, yes, and it'll give you quotes, yes, but there is more in the book that won't be on Spark Notes. There is some, and I'm not saying that means Spark Notes is bad or anything, but a book is a book, it's hundreds of thousands of words. There is loads of quality stuff in there you can use for your analysis and arguments, and Spark Notes, understandably, can't have all of it. It will have, some of it, good stuff, but it won't have all of it. And there is some stuff in the book that you'll read and you'll think, you know what, I'll remember that better than I do the stuff on Spark Notes, which is why it's important to read your book. Please, just read your book, man, goddamn. Just read your books, please. That is the most important thing. You need to read the books. If you read the books, everything else will follow. You'll understand what your teachers are talking about. It's easier to make your theme mind maps and all that kind of thing with quotations and all. You'll know what the people are talking about in your class when it comes to the book itself. Number 2, don't worry about grades, not just yet. And even up to like winter year 13, grades of course are important by then, but at the same time there is always room for improvement. Though from January onwards for year 13, that's when it's crunch time. You need to be, getting the grades or being close to the grades then. But at any time before that, don't worry about it too much, especially in year 12. You will not get the grades you want at the end of year 12. You'll be thinking, oh, okay, I'm predicted an AAB at the end of year 13, so I should be getting an AAB at the end of year 12, and then I'll just coast. No. You'll be probably looking at C, B, maybe B's, C's. I got like C, B, C, D at the end of year 12. Ironically, the B was in psychology. I got a C in psychology. You will not be getting the grades you want on paper, but that's fine because you have time to improve. These 2 years are going to be a huge 2 years when it comes to your academic skill. It won't be like GCSEs, where you just kind of improve a little bit. You'll shoot up. It will be really, really quick, and it will be really, really hard. Not hard as in like, difficult, but the improvements will come, and they will come hard, So don't worry, you'll do it. Next thing, hit the AOs. You don't need, as I said, you don't need to be hitting AO1, AO2, AO3, AO4, AO5. You don't need to hit every single AO in every single paragraph, but they all need to be in there somewhere. Of course, AO1 and AO2 should be everywhere, because that's obviously how you write. The fact that you're actually writing the essay and your analysis, that should be everywhere. But AO3 can be in one paragraph, AO4 can be in the next, and AO5 can be in the next. You can sprinkle them out between the three if you want. You could. But it's probably better to have developed context in one paragraph, developed AO4, wider reading in another paragraph, and developed AO5. And that's exactly what I mean. Don't spread your bases too thin. You need to make sure that you're only having 3, maximum 4 points. You should not have 5 points in an essay. You should not have 6 points. You should not have, you shouldn't even have 4. You should have 3. 3 is your magic number. You should be having 3 pages worth of work at least, maximum 4. You should be having 3 paragraphs. Each paragraph should probably be a page. If you aren't doing a page per topic, this is just how I did it, but if you aren't doing a page per topic, you have not done enough. You should have 3 topics per essay. You should have a page done per topic, and in that you should have a few quotations. You shouldn't just have the standard PEE structure of, my point is this, or X is a bad person. The evidence is this, quote, this means da da da. No, it should read more like an experience than an essay. You should be saying, there are several instances in the novel where X is shown to be quite a cruel character. Firstly, quote, explanation, and now analyze the language, analyze the theme. This links into the theme of something which is also quite prevalent in the play or in the novel. You can bring in some context here. Then you can say, you can bring in another quote from somewhere else where maybe there is something that more directly refers to the context. So you could have something that the character says or something that the character does that reflects another thing that the author is trying to show in the play or in the novel or in the poem or whatever. Poetry is a little different, got to admit. It's more technical than books, I would say, and books and plays, because poetry is obviously shorter, so there's less to analyze, which means you need to spend more of your analysis on the actual structure of the poetry, because the structure in poetry matters more than structure in books. Not to say that there is no structure in books, but since, of course, there's less text, it's, a higher percentage of what the author is, or the poet or whatever is trying to put across. So, analyze the structure, know your technical vocabulary, know what enjambment is, know what caesura is, all these kind of things. You should be knowing them, but not only know them, why are they included? That's what it all boils down to. Why is it included? Because everything in literature is done for a reason. There is some really cool stuff online where you can see poets. I know it happened in one English class. We were looking at Wilfred Owen, and my teacher showed, this was in like year 9 though, and he showed me like a picture of a notebook, like a page in his notebook, and he was writing out one of the poems we were studying, but there were like loads of lines that were crossed out and everything, and it was all just different stuff. So the poem, and I saw that, the poem could be completely different than it actually is, and that kind of taught me, writers are people too. They spend a lot of time editing, they make mistakes, they change things, they remove entire characters, they remove, entire story arcs, all of that kind of thing. It happens. So everything in there is for a reason. Why did the writer include this character? What is this character meant to represent? And you can't say this character represents nothing, because every book on the spec has literary merit. Every book on the spec has an author trying to make a point. It all means something. And even if it doesn't in real life, like you can't obviously dig up a dead person and ask them, oh hey, what did Mr. Burling mean and all that kind of thing. And sometimes it does mean nothing. Like sometimes maybe Mr. Burling was just meant to be an idiot. But the point isn't whether that's true or not. The point is how well you can argue that, how well you can analyze the text and say that it's true and prove it. That's what you need to be doing. That is what literature is about. That's what the A-level is about. Being able to take a point or take something from text and argue it in whichever way you see fit. So, yeah, those are the things that I kept in mind when I was doing my A-levels. I got an A. Hopefully I get it remarked and it'll be an A-star because I got shafted on that second paper. Not gonna lie, I don't think it's very fair. But, yeah, we'll see how it goes, right? Thank you very much for listening.